Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Fazbear Entertainment would like you to put your hands together for the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear.
What the lore? The lore, guys, the lore! The lore! Ring the lore alarms, the lore! The lore!
Let me just start off by saying that I am no way professional when it comes to making these types of videos. My main reason for making it is due to having information from the Tales of the Pizzaplex books that make a few things in Security Breach's base game, as well as the Ruined DLC, a lot clearer. Mainly for those who haven't read the books and probably aren't planning to, and have just been depending on the Cliff Notes versions they've been getting from videos or the wiki, and maybe even just parroting things they've heard that might not be correct. Like how MATPAT claims the Mimic was built by Henry as a companion for Charlie, and cites the Tales book number 6 story titled The Mimic as evidence when it couldn't be further from the truth.
This neural network controlling the Pizzaplex isn't just influenced by Afton. According to the books, the AI program was originally built to play with Charlie, a girl that wore a green wristband in order for the security puppet to protect her. That's why we see Tiger Rock, the book's manifestation of this same AI, with 2 colored eyes. It has evil and good data inside of it, and different animatronics are tapped into different amounts of that same code. According to the books, the AI program was originally built to play with Charlie.
That isn't what happened. That isn't what happened at all. Matt, which member of your team told you this? Just to clarify though, this video isn't an attack on MATPAT, as he actively encourages people to challenge his theories. Honestly, the only reason I titled the video the way I did is because I wanted to use this meme artwork drawn by a Tumblr mutual of Dana and I, since this is probably what the entire video is going to come off sounding like anyway, and I'm fully expecting to get comments from people saying how I'm wrong, which I've already gotten on age-old Tumblr posts from before Ruin even released, so I'm not going to deny that spite wasn't a bit of a motivator leading to this video's creation. Anyway, Mimic was built for a boy named David by his father, Edwin Murray, a man who, after his wife died in childbirth, sold the home they had initially purchased and decided to just live in the factory to start up his own robotics company. A company which he sold to Fazbear Entertainment, and since it was mainly just him, he was tasked with personally building their outsourced animatronics for Fazbears. And while this does kind of parallel the puppet being built for Charlie in the original FNaF story, since he did kind of build the Mimic to watch David, they're not the same. The books, the Silver Eyes trilogy and the Fazbear Frights series both, have always been very direct when it comes to characters featured in the games and addressing them by name. Edwin is thus a completely separate character altogether, and the Mimic has no direct connection to Henry and Charlie as a result. Also, that thing about the eye color he mentions?
That's why we see Tiger Rock, the book's manifestation of this same AI, with 2 colored eyes. It has evil and good data inside of it, and different animatronics are tapped into different amounts of that same code.
I'm pretty sure the Mimic just has 2 colored eyes because it was allowed to design its persona itself, opting to go with making itself a white tiger like the stuffed toy of the kid that he used to hang out with. And while it's more common in portrayals as well as nature for white tigers to have blue eyes, they can have green eyes on rare occasions just like regular tigers. So that's likely why it just has 1 of each color. The reason Roxy has those green holographic bits in the AR world is because, well, that's just how Cassie remembers her, and still sees her. Cassie's thoughts and memories have been shown to affect the AR world just as much as the Mexis, as we see in the salon level, and even in the daycare when we visit the daycare attendant's secret room, and it's all nice and organized in the AR world compared to its disheveled and honestly gross with all the spider webs real world version, because it's what she remembers it looking like once upon a time. I say this because in the books, it's frequently established the augmented reality powered by Fazbear Entertainment can create complete fabrications of events solely based on the memory of those plugged into it. And Cassie, being a confirmed daycare kid with a potential single father working as a Faz technician, was likely brought to the Plex whenever her dad worked late or after hours when she was much younger, before she was deemed old enough to stay home alone, and would be left in the care of Sun and Moon during that time frame, which means she's seeing their room, as well as Roxy, through rose-tinted glasses. Literally. The Vanity Network puts a pink filter over everything. It's literally rose-tinted. Anyway, while the Monty Within does present us with the concept of good and bad data with AI in a thesis made by the main character utilizing IRL neuroscience research, however, the AI in this case is the left brain, and it does give us a lot of insight as to why the mimic does what it does due to the exposure to negative and harmful experiences as a machine copying what it learns, and as a pseudo-child in the early stages of neurological development. But that isn't what's happening here with the eye color. The eye colors aren't because of good and bad code inside of the mimic. If that was to be believed, then the bad code color would be purple, not blue, as purple has been established the color of evil in William Afton since FNaF 2. Even in Help Wanted, while Glitchtrap's hologram glows the color of good, as MATPAT puts it.
Oh, what the fuck are you? What are you? What, I don't even know who you are. You're a bunny with purple eyes. Are you the purple bunny guy?
His eyes still glow purple. The fact that so much is associated with the color purple in FNaF is why the Mexus also being purple was so misleading and actually had a lot of people convinced that it was the villain at first before the big reveal and all the hints towards something not being quite right going on. Also, if green eyes are supposed to represent Charlie as well as goodness, explain, baby. Her eyes only became green after Elizabeth Afton's soul got trapped inside her and fused with whatever AI consciousness was already there. At least in Sister Location and the game franchise as a whole. In the comics, which changes both Elizabeth's hair and eye color between two flashbacks featuring her, baby, adult Charlie, quote unquote, her eyes start off as silver and then become green even before she fully scoops Elizabeth. Even though Charlie's herself are brown. But they probably did that to sell the idea that this robot and this robot were one and the same. But even if you disregard the design discrepancies in the graphic novel, she's far from good. She's the exact opposite.
The scooper only hurts for a moment.
No! Ah! Don't scoop me! Not me!
Anyway, my point. Some people have said that reading the books to fully understand the story of FNaF feels like giving the players homework and, as a result, is bad game design. But I personally disagree.
Nerd!
But then again, I'm the person who's dedicated weeks of their life to collecting and organizing information, composing what my desktop Google Drive tells me is presently a 83-page work-in-progress document dedicated to just the daycare attendant by overanalyzing every scrap available like some scientific researcher documenting an endangered species, so... Anyway, what I'm trying to say is this. As one of the loser nerds in FNaF class that actually did the assigned readings, I'm going to attempt to give as detailed an explanation about the core information of certain key stories that virtually connect back to the Security Breach game. But first, let's talk about the books themselves and what makes the Silver Eyes trilogy, Fazbear Frights, and Tales from the Pizzaplex significantly different from one another. Trust me, this is as crucial as everything else when it comes to understanding Security Breach and what the story is trying to tell going forward. Here's the thing about the FNaF books that some YouTubers using them to theorycraft don't really tell you. These books all take place in 3 separate continuities. The Silver Eyes trilogy is about Charlie, who we know is the puppet in game, and our friends as teenagers in a reimagined retelling of FNaF 1 through Pizza Simulator's story. One that cuts out Mike Afton as a character entirely.
Stop! He's already dead!
That feel when his name being crossed out in the survival logbook was foreshadowing. Anyway, the technology from the Silver Eyes trilogy definitely exists in the FNaF universe, like the illusion discs that allow animatronics to disguise themselves as human or as monsters, as well as devices that allow humans to appear invisible to any nearby animatronics. We see evidence of them in the game universe, like Sister Location, having the novel description version of the illusion disc.
The chest cavity should now be open. Remove the power module from the chest cavity.
Ring the lore, alarms the lore!
And we even see it in Security Breach with Vanny and her weird distortion vision effect that makes it so that Freddy is unable to see her.
You didn't see the dancing rabbit lady right in front of us?
No, I did not. There is no rabbit at the Mega Pizzaplex. Not anymore.
But because of the meta storytelling direction that FNaF has been doing since Help
The
Wanted,
majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic. Lawsuits pending. But we aren't
it makes it difficult to determine if the Silver Eyes is canon, or if things as they are told to have happened in the games themselves at this point have happened the way they were initially presented. It happened, but it didn't happen. But it did happen. But it didn't. But did it?
Was that the bite of 87?
Honestly, it's best not to think about it. That's what I would have said before a big brain moment shared between me and Dana.
Yeah, this is big brain time.
When it comes down to what's the true canon, it's all canon.
Boo!
Think of it like the Spider-Verse, or in this case, the FNaF-verse. It's the same story repeating itself in similar or even completely different circumstances across universes. And just like the Spider-Verse, the FNaF-verse has its own canon events that have to happen in each timeline in order for it to be considered a part of it. Someone has to become Spider-Man, Freddy's has to open. Uncle Ben has to die, Charlie has to die. Gwen Stacy dies, or Peter Parker in the Spider-Gwen continuity. Elizabeth dies. Dr. Octavius becomes Doc Ock. Someone, almost always exclusively Afton, will become a child murderer attempting to harness Remnant. Furthermore, Charlie will always die and either come to possess the puppet or be pseudo-resurrected as a robot by Henry, sometimes maybe even both. And Elizabeth will always die via scooping by Circus Baby and end up possessing her. And consistently, due to Afton being the one responsible for the missing children's incident in most continuities, he'll almost always become a Springtrap. These are the canon events. Hence the difference between the Silver Eyes and Gameverse Henry and Afton and how they switch roles in terms of who created Circus Baby and who was attempting to revive the dead, since without Henry trying to recreate Charlie in the Gameverse, there would have been no adult Charlie bot for Afton to steal.
Daddy, just once let me go play with her. She's so pretty and shiny. Didn't you make her just for me?
Also, I feel I should note the very first mention of Willie and Afton's name and a few other character names happened in the Silver Eyes trilogy before they ever appeared in the games themselves, so... Anyway, when it comes to Fazbear Frights, this book series itself is not only its own continuity, featuring the same technologies as the game and the Silver Eyes trilogy, it also exists as in-universe stories, the same way the original Gameverse does. Even a version of Help Wanted that received a commercial release exists, and Security Breach itself gives further confirmation with all its arcade cabinet games. The same way Into the Spider-Verse had comics featuring Blonde Peter's Spider-Man origins. Security Breach is littered with these arcade cabinets, and they give a really clear indication that the Fazbear Frights novels exist as actual books sold by Fazbear Entertainment themselves to further make fun of their company's gruesome past and make a profit. Same way Help Wanted implies the original games to be, and thus retcons their original continuity to a certain degree, since now we have to take into consideration that some things, well, canon in the original verse, were added just for the sake of making the story seem more sensational in the current New Game Plus version of the Gameverse.
Want the lore?
And this is where Tales from the Pizzaplex differs. But before I get into that, there's something else I want to talk about specifically. At the time of this recording, the 8th and final book of Tales from the Pizzaplex was leaked with information many consider game-changing, pun intended, when it comes to understanding FNaF 4, as well as Midnight Motorist.
Who'd have thought it was even possible? I always suspected. I always knew there was another component to this. Oh yes, I secretly suspected it all along, but I didn't say it out loud because I was wondering when confirmation was going to come my way. And now it has. And now I know. The lore. The lore is finally complete.
That information alone was more than enough to cause me to throw away an entire secondary tangent that was in the early drafts for this video. Originally wasn't going to talk about it at all because it being unreleased, but considering I'm probably not the only one coping with the new information provided, I felt I should cover it here if just to use it as another example of the books giving us answers to previously had questions regarding what has been happening in the gameverse, especially years after the fact. Let's talk about didophobia and what I think is going on with the timeline of the original gameverse as a result. Didophobia is the last Tales from the Pizzaplex story before the Mimic Epilogue series conclusion. And this story is about a boy trapped in an experiment that involves being locked in a series of observation rooms with physical versions of the nightmare animatronics that are nothing but mechanical dolls or puppets running on rail tracks that he just thinks are alive and moving because of gas being pumped into his room that keeps him from realizing the truth of what's really going on. And while I have read the story and know more details, that's all I'm going to say about it. As I said before, it's not officially released just yet. Anyway, it was always known for a while that Afton did experiments of some kind in a section of the sister location complex and kept tabs on his subjects through the eyes of psychic friend Fredbear.
He's here, he's there, he's everywhere. Who are you gonna call? Psychic friend Fredbear.
We see the observation rooms and the camera feeds in the Ennard boss fight and when restoring the power on Night 2. However, illusion discs exist, right? It wouldn't make sense for Afton to use gas if he had illusion discs. Not if the discs didn't exist at the time he started these experiments. The gas experiments happened long after Afton's youngest son, the neglected crying child, died at 83, which would explain why Afton didn't want Elizabeth anywhere near Circus Babe in the first place, even without the whole secondary motive of capturing lone children through her taken into account. Afton then kills Charlie, as well as the 5 other kids in 87, just weeks, if not the same week, as the bite of 87.
Was that the bite of 87?
Leading to the closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which he was convicted over, as we've known since FNaF 1, but he got out on bail due to the bodies never being found. After that, Afton then constructs the complex where the events of Sister Location take place, and this is where the experiments soon follow. Because the Sister Location underground bunker didn't exist until after the closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, as stated by Hand Unit.
Allow me to fill this somewhat frightening silence with some light-hearted banter. Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment.
Towards the end of these experiments, he goes back to the old Freddy's Pizza location in order to lure and dismantle the possessed animatronics before Karma finally delivers justice upon him. Meanwhile, Mike is getting scooped, and we all know what happens after.
Father, it's me, Michael. I did it. I found it. It was right where you said it would be. They were all there. They didn't recognize me at first, but then they thought I was you. And I found her. I put her back together, just like you asked me to. She's free now. But something is wrong with me. I should be dead, but I'm not. I've been living in shadows. There is only one thing left for me to do now. I'm going to come find you. I'm going to come find you.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name, but I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called. You have all been called here, into a labyrinth of sounds and smells, misdirection, and misfortune. A labyrinth with no exit, a maze with no prize. You don't even realize that you are trapped. Your lust for blood has driven you in endless circles, chasing the cries of children in some unseen chamber, always seeming so near, yet somehow out of reach. But you will never find them. None of you will. This is where your story ends. And to you, my brave volunteer, who somehow found this job listing not intended for you. Although there was a way out planned for you, I have a feeling that's not what you want. I have a feeling that you are right where you want to be. I am remaining as well. I am nearby. This place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of every tragedy should. And to you monsters trapped in the corridors, be still, and give up your spirits. They don't belong to you. For most of you, I believe there is peace, and perhaps more, waiting for you after the smoke clears. Although for one of you, the darkest pit of hell has opened to swallow you whole, so don't keep the devil waiting, friend. My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours. And then, what became of you? I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication.
And then the original Afton is sent to suffer eternally in ultimate custom night hell, while another version of him lives on as glitch trapped. So, what does this tell us about FNAF 4? What it tells us is that the core gameplay is from the point of view of the kids being experimented on. Michael likely being one because of his drawings in the survival log. The 8-bit minigames, meanwhile, are from the perspective of the crying child. They are flashbacks that show us what led up to this happening, even though the Ultimate Character Encyclopedia says otherwise, but this was published before all this information was released to even the people making it. And these experiments are, in themselves, along with whatever else Afton was doping these kids up for, what led to the development of illusion disc technology for him to better abduct children to harvest remnant from. This would make the illusion disc we pull out of Funtime Freddy in games some kind of ineffective prototype. And it makes sense because if they had working illusion discs to make themselves appear human, the Funtimes wouldn't have needed to smash their bodies into one and use Michael as a human meat costume to escape. And then there's also the joke cancellation teaser mentioning gas leaks that Scott made for Sister Location that he later mentioned was a part of the lore. And what do we see in Sister Location's custom night? Gas canisters, which were pointed out by some YouTubers like Daka, who proposed the hallucinogenic gas theory all the way back in 2016.
Are these gas canisters used for hallucinations to they go up to the FNAF 4 kid's room to make him hallucinate, or are they oxygen tanks?
The gas was always there. Anyway, Tales from the Pizzaplex. Having read all the stories officially released thus far blind, in both recordings as well as live on Twitch, I can say with confidence that these stories, if not 100% canon to the gameverse, have actually happened prior to the events of Security Breach in some shape or form. Now, the main thing to keep in mind for Tales from the Pizzaplex is that while a good portion of its stories don't at all take place at the Pizzaplex, the ones that do are heavily implied to be our Pizzaplex from the gameverse, if not an alternate version of it that's not exact, but close enough. Like Blonde Peter Parker and Peter B. Parker are the same, but different. Yes, the books also confirm there exist multiple locations, but considering the Mimic is from the main Pizzaplex featured in the Tales series, and there isn't any way for him to turn up in the game unless it was just a slightly altered universe variant, if not exactly the same as the Gameverse Pizzaplex. Unfortunately, this also makes the story about the girl who gets stuck in AR where everyone is dying from super cancer and the world is getting overrun by jelly people canon as well.
She just becomes jelly people!
But that story, believe it or not, is one of the last to take place before the events of Security Breach. And it explains why there aren't any AR/VR booths left at the Plex by the time Gregory wrecks everyone's shiz. A lot of the stories actually explain why things are so gutted, empty, or in disrepair by the time of the game. Because decommissioning animatronics, sealing off whole rooms, and just straight up removing attractions is something they've shown to do whenever something catastrophic and potentially lawsuit forming happens. And the first example of this where it's made clear that's what happens is with claustrophobia. A story that starts off with a group of friends visiting the Plex while something goes wrong with an AR booth. It's our girl from the Under Construction story, not Kai from Tiger Rock for reasons I'll explain in a bit. They're looking at the map of the Pizzaplex, and the map directory mentions Bellora's fitness inflex, despite it not appearing anywhere on the map or physically being a part of the Plex. The rest of the story tells us why. Bellora's fitness inflex, as well as Bellora herself, were removed from Pizzaplex before the Mega Pizzaplex ever opened because during the testing phase, the main character of the story gets stuck in the tubes. Tubes much too small for an adult man, and as a result, he ends up becoming a slowly dying, stretched out bloody sausage of broken bones and gore due to Bellora, following her programming and attempting to help, dragging him through the tubes, completely oblivious to the fact she's hurting and essentially killing him. We can assume the same happened to other attractions featured in the books that don't make an appearance in the game just from how their related stories end. Freddy's Fortress and Haps, dismantled after constantly collapsing tubes, and broken Haps accidentally eviscerating a couple of kids while just following its programming the same as Bellora. The roleplay area? Shut down after a kid dies inside a genuine antique spring lock suit that somehow ended up in the costume department instead of getting sent to the Pizzaplex's museum, like the rest of the old pizzeria memorabilia. The animatronic doll Build-A-Bear ripoff in Nexie? Closed after one of the robot dolls convinced a girl to cut off all her skin and stretch it over an endoskeleton.
Oh my god.
Daddy.
Which they also sold, by the way, in parts to fix their little dolls. The storyteller tree powered by the Mimic? Removed with the Mimic tossed into the underground garbage tunnels after only 3 weeks due to causing power fluctuations and negatively affecting all the animatronics and attractions. I'm not even joking, what we see in the books is far worse than what we're shown in Security Breach. But not before Nexie is created due to a power outage and Kai getting trapped in the AR booth and leading to that attraction being roped off at the start of Under Construction.
I've connected the two dots.
You didn't connect.
I've connected them.
Now, obviously, even with these attractions removed, the book Pizzaplex is still a lot more packed than the one we physically see in-game. And it's even laid out differently too, as it is frequently described as being round like a pizza in the books. However, the concept art for Security Breach, developed at the time that the books were being written, featured a circular atrium more like that of the books than the one we ended up with in-game. Why they didn't follow through with making it as exactly as it appeared in the books? Well, that can easily be explained as a limitation on Steelwoolf's part, as it would be rather taxing and time-consuming to model and map out all these other locations. That's why so much of the maps of the basement levels got cut before Security Breach's release. So,
a map.
if you take that into consideration, it's definitely meant to be the same Pizzaplex. Anyway, these are just a tip of the lore iceberg for New Game vs. Plus, because now I'm going to get into the primary focus of this video. Gregory, as well as Glitch Trap / Burn Trap. I will also talk about Vanessa and Vanny, but I'm mainly going to talk about those first two. Especially since the Mimic is what many assume to have been the potential mastermind behind everything, and who Glitch Trap and Burn Trap really were this whole time. And while this was a theory I initially had problems with, after some refreshing on Help Wanted lore, I've come to the conclusion that Glitch Trap is a Mimic. But a different Mimic that fully believes itself to be Afton, and not the one trapped in the basement in ruin that we encounter, which I will explain in more detail later. First, let's talk about Gregory and the story he makes a prominent appearance in, GGY. GGY is focused on Tony and his two friends, who aren't formally named until the very end, as Tony establishes early on in the story that they create and go by new pen names anytime they get a new creative writing assignment, calling each other only by those names until the assignment is turned in for grading. But this time, after being stuck as the kid to do all the work in the group project and having said project ruined by his supposed friends, Tony is in mood here, and entirely justified, by the way. Tony drops the nicknames that he'd been mentally referring to them as for the entire duration of the story thus far, revealing one of them to be known as Greg. Greg is obviously shorthand for Gregory, but before the name drop, we get a lot of context clues that this smelly little preteen is indeed our horrible gremlin boy from the game. In contrast to Boots, Rab was one of the smallest boys in their class. He too was skinny.
Small enough to fit in an animatronic bear, perhaps?
He was one of the smallest boys in their class. He too was skinny, because his skin was paler than Boots. Boots's dusky skin, Rab could appear a little weak and frail. He had really big brown eyes.
And those made him look like a wide-eyed little kid sometimes. Yeah, this Gregory.
The law, ring the law alarms, everyone!
But wait! There's more!
He grinned as he ran a hand through his unruly brown hair. He admitted the week before that he'd cut it himself. He looked at it. Gregory's hair does look like he cuts it himself. Also, I'd like to point out that for the group project, Gregory gives himself the codename Dr. Rabbit. I wonder where Gregory could have gotten that name from.
The law!
Maybe this choice of nickname was also some sort of hint towards him and Vanessa creating the Mexus together before the events of Ruin. Though, to be honest, I'd call the Mexus more of a warden than a doctor. Anyway, back to GGY and the backstory lore.
The law!
Throughout the tale, as Tony is sleuthing about, searching for who GGY is, the potentiality of him being his friend Greg never once crossing his mind for some reason, we found out more about GGY's backstory. Greg is presumed to have, by Tony's assumption, due to his own living situation not being great, well-off parents in a nice house. But at the same time, he's cutting his own hair like he can't afford to go to the hairdresser or barber or even have his mom cut it for him like I know the neighbor boys used to have their mom do. Not that kids don't do stupid things like cutting their own hair on the regular, so there's always that possibility. But there's still something else to keep in mind. As stated before, GGY is Gregory. GGY is also patient 46, the one who kept killing off the outsourced therapist his school and Fazbear's were both providing him and Vanessa respectfully.
I understand you'll be transferring to a different location soon. I'll be sorry to see you go. I think we've been making progress, don't you? You can request to come back and speak with me more on your own time, though. Did you know that? Our sessions don't have to be company mandated. I have all sorts of clients, Vanessa. I don't just work with corporations. I work with individuals and small groups. I even work in schools. I'm wherever I'm needed.
I'm needed somewhere else now. Thank you.
A coincidence concocted by Steelwill to purposely throw us off and make us think 46 was Vanny despite her being an alter of Vanessa and thus would be included as a part of her patient file instead of receiving a whole new patient number of her own. Not to mention the differences in their background, with Vanessa having an abusive father not matching up with patient 46's background.
Hi, go ahead. Sit down.
I don't know you. What happened to...
Oh, we'll get to know each other in no time. I've read through all your files, so I feel like we've been talking for weeks. I feel like I know your dad, too. Bill, right? Your dad's name was Bill? I'm sorry, what did you say?
I try to do what I'm supposed to do.
I know you do. Your supervisor notes that you follow instructions perfectly. Your dad made you follow instructions, didn't he? I'm talking about the custody battle between your mum and your dad. Your dad didn't play fair, did he? He used to make your mum look bad in court. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Do you want to talk about how that felt? I suppose I don't need you to tell me it felt bad to have a parent scare you into saying things that weren't true. He manipulated you. It wasn't your fault. It's really sad. But it's common for one parent to use their child to hurt the other parent. I know your mum after she lost the custody case.
I was supposed to be a good girl.
What happened to her had nothing to do with you, even though it was your testimony that did it. Was that testimony true? No, I didn't think so. But your dad is to blame, not you.
Listen, I'm on your side here. Our sessions are just between you and me. The techs can't prove what they think, so you're not in trouble. I just thought you could tell me what you're trying to do. Maybe if we could get to the bottom of that, it could help you. What do you think? Still not talking? All right. Well, then let's do this. Why don't we talk about the research I did in your past, shall we? Some therapists think they should only focus on information they get from their clients, but some therapists, like me, think it's helpful to find out about clients from other sources. Want to guess what I found out when I looked into the tragedy of your past? All that stuff about your parents? You aren't even gonna look at me? Fine. You can look at the floor all you want. But it won't change the fact that none of what you said in your file about your parents was true. The truth is, you had great parents, a great childhood. Why did you lie? Look at me. Tell me why you lied. You... Well, I can understand why you might feel angry about the way I just confronted you. Why don't we come back to this another day? You're shaking your head as though that's not going to happen.
As the CDs confirm, Patient 46 did have a good home life and parents, but had a tendency to lie about his past to all his therapists. However, something presumably happened to lead to Gregory running away from home, as the escape ending suggests him to be homeless and that he'd been living at the Pizzaplex for some time now, if all those areas where it looks like someone had been camping out at the Plex says anything. Not like it would be the first time it's happened, since not only does Vanny/Vanessa stay in the Plex, we also have a character straight out of the Tales books who also does the same thing in the Bobby Dots. Speaking of which, with his hacking skills, Gregory could have totally gotten himself an apartment at the Fazplex tower down the block to squat in the same way Abe did. Anyway, something happened to Gregory's parents, and he's now in a foster family with new parents who aren't so great. Because the therapist from the CDs, who confronts Patient 46, Gregory, of having lied specifically, says he had great parents. Past tense.
The truth is, you had great parents.
The Lord!
Gregory's birth parents are likely dead, and his current home situation can't be the greatest if he distrusts adults so much and is willing to eventually run away to the point of being reported missing. And since he's living at the Plex in secret by the time of security breach, it would explain why Vanessa was so especially annoyed by his presence, since she'd likely already been trying to smoke him out for a while and only just got evidence of him being there. Even if it does seem like she's only just found out about him staying at the Plex the night the game takes place.
I bet you think you're real clever, Gregory. Yeah, I know your name. You're in big trouble. This is not the night to be wasting my time. So, you are going to wait right there in Lost and Found until your parents or the police arrive.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, GGY, aka Gregory, is the high score haver on a majority of arcade games in the Plex, just as we see in-game, as well as a master hacker, which is how he is assumed to have been able to get such impossibly high scores, despite there being no evidence of the machines being hacked, to untrained eyes anyway. At least, not yet in the story. As we know from the CDs, he gets caught eventually for hacking.
Do you know a place called Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex? I'll take your silence as a yes. And besides, I know you know it, because the technicians who work for Pizzaplex know you. Or rather, I guess it would be better to say that they think they do. They report that they've caught you on camera, or at least it appears to be you. Nothing to say about that? Well, the techs are convinced that you've hacked into their system many times. Although, I'll admit I don't see any proof here. Seems like they have more of a gut feeling than fact. But apparently, the hacks are causing all kinds of problems. You get a kick out of that? The idea of techs running around like chickens with their heads cut off? Yeah, that's a funny image, isn't it? But seriously, I have to say that I think it's weird that you'd spend so much time in such a busy, social place.
And just like in the game, he has a strong attachment to Freddy, as it's Freddy who is shown to be the directly hacked and acting as a kind of bodyguard animatronic for him to the point of stalking Tony.
I can smell you.
We also learned through Tony pickpocketing a Fazbear employee for their card to access an employee kiosk that Gregory had modified a guest pass to the Plex that doubles as a security badge with the highest level security clearance, which he'd been using to enter the Plex after hours and to, as I mentioned before, bring in the therapist working for his and Tony's school, as well as Fazbear Entertainment, to let the Glamrocks, or something else, murder and mangle them. which fully cements the whole deal that he's meant to be patient 46, as I've already explained.
Well, I hate to do this right off the bat, but I've been directed to ask you about this. Apparently, I'm the 4th therapist you've had. And apparently, all 3 of your former therapists have gone missing. Or 2 of them are missing. I don't want to scare you, but I have to tell you that one of them was found dead. That doesn't seem to upset you. Well, then I guess I'll go ahead and tell you that the woman's body was pretty messed up. It looked like it was mangled by machinery. That doesn't bother you either? It's all pretty strange, I think. I'm not clear on the circumstances. Apparently the police don't have any evidence. How does all of this make you feel? Maybe I should be watching my back. Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Okay, shall we move on to something lighter?
Which, at the time of GGY's release, was a little hard to accept.
Back to the Future Fan 88 says, I personally think making Gregory patient 46 is stupid. Agreed. Like, hard
I
agree.
mean, if he was always patient 46 from the beginning, it makes sense, but... And back then, I was fully supportive of FNaF's theory made before Ruin about Cassie being patient 46, especially with previously believed plot holes like the Gregory being homeless thing I mentioned before. But after seeing how Gregory in Ruin was apparently a skilled enough programmer to hack staff bots,
Cassie, is that you? Gregory?
potentially help Vanessa program the Mexus and trap the Mimic, that walkie-talkie and Gregory's taunting voice lines had to come from somewhere.
I'm Gregory. You're not Gregory. What are you?
And not to mention he was full-on willing to drop Cassie to her death.
Security program was designed to keep it hidden, but you shut down the security, and now it's free. It's not your fault. I know you did it for me, to save me, but we can't risk being followed. I'm sorry.
Wait, what?
No!
Damn, ice cold.
And it is the real Gregory according to game files, not the Mimic. Yeah, GGY, Greg, patient 46. He's 100% Gregory. So, what about those remaining plot holes? Let's address what is said by one of his therapists in the CDs about being seen at the Pizzaplex talking to someone.
I saw some ink blot test results in your file. I like ink blot tests. You want to do one? Yes? Okay. How about this one? What do you see? What? You want to hold it? Okay. You think it's a mask? It reminds you of a mask? Like a disguise? Yeah, I can see that. You like the idea of being disguised? Disguises let you be sort of invisible, don't they? You can get away with almost anything when you're invisible, can't you? Yeah, you like that idea, huh? Well, okay, moving on. I have another report we need to talk about. Apparently, the techs were reviewing communications going in and out of this building, and they came across some interesting things. They say you were in communication with someone, or maybe something. Pretty strange. What do you think about that? Nothing? Well, the techs say it looked to them like it was an attempt to manipulate you, or maybe to lure you somewhere. There, that's better. On this side of the desk, I can see your eyes. The thing is, when I read the communications, I get something different out of them. I don't think you're being manipulated here. I think you're the one doing the manipulating. No comment? Huh? Okay. Then how about this? I have this still shot the techs pulled from the security footage that recorded you in the Pizzaplex. That's you, isn't it? I know this image is distorted, but I think it looks like you. And you're not alone here. You're talking to someone. Or something. It's hard to tell. What are those things? They almost look like rabbit ears. What? You find that amusing? Well, I guess it is.
Now, that someone had rabbit ears. With Burntrap stuck in the old pizzeria, there's only 3 possibilities of who it could be. Glamrock Bonnie, Vanny, or a Fazbear technician, because of, the mask. However, Bonnie I'm immediately disqualifying, just like Burntrap, because Gregory's age, as well as the book not mentioning him in GGY, suggests that Monty murderized and hid him behind Bonnie Ball long before any of this took place. So, this just leaves Vanny and the Faz technician. Vanny is also out because Gregory has no idea who she is when she sees her. Unless she approached him while still dressed like Vanessa. The rabbit ears that appear in the security footage could be the result of Glitchtrap's influence over her, posing as Vanessa, or literally it could have just been Vanessa. Vanny could be giving Gregory some kind of warning about knowing what he's done to the animatronics and whatever else it is he's doing besides squatting at the Plex and hacking the games. She could be telling him that he should just quit it and go home, back to his foster parents who Gregory clearly doesn't want to go back to. Leave, or else. The or else being her playing with him and turning him into another Afton sacrifice.
Are you having fun yet?
But Gregory doesn't listen. And so, he gets all his hacked animatronic toys taken from him by Vanny. She erases or completely resets his guest profile, making his special pass useless, and whatever other tools he could have had to use to take back control of the Glamrox are gone. Even Freddy, who experienced a system malfunction on stage and essentially rebooted in safe mode, doesn't seem to completely answer to him the way he used to, or even really remember him anymore.
There you are. Scanning complete. How odd. Your guest profile is unknown to me. Who are you?
I'm Gregory.
Which would explain the odd hesitation when giving him his name when prompted, since he's likely shocked that Freddy was taken from him too, forcing Gregory to rely on communication as opposed to hacks in order for the Glamrock to help him. Because he sure as hell had no qualms about hiding inside his chest. He definitely wasn't shy or hesitant then.
Will you shut up?
Who said that?
I did. And down here.
Down where? I still do not see you.
Okay, listen. You were sleeping, so I opened the stomach hatch and climbed inside.
My stomach hatch? That place is reserved for oversized birthday cakes and piñatas. It is not a safe play area.
Whatever ulterior motives Gregory may have, if any, I don't have the faintest idea of what they could be. Because I don't see him as being influenced by Glitchtrap the same way as Vanessa is. The Balloon Boy world theory of his soul being trapped in the game doesn't really work in my opinion, since unlike Princess Quest, there's no impact or indication anything happened in the base game for beating it, and it seems more connected to Eclipse than anything. And with the comments from his therapist on how good at manipulating people he is...
The thing is, when I read the communications, I get something different out of them. I don't think you're being manipulated here. I think you're the one doing the manipulating. No comment? Huh? Okay.
I didn't know Roxy could see through walls.
These are Roxy's eyes?
Well, yeah. There was an accident in the raceway.
Is she okay?
Well, nothing seems to stop her.
This upgrade. It was Chica's. Please, be honest. How did you get it?
When I was in the kitchen earlier, she fell into some sort of garbage smasher.
Is she okay?
Well, she's still functional.
Oh. Oh. Oh.
Despite this, I honestly just see Gregory as a scared kid who has been forced to put on a tough act and play defensive his entire life, leading him to lash out with aggression in his they get what they deserve mentality towards the Glamrocks simply because they could have hurt him.
I would never do anything to hurt them.
What? All they've done all night is try to hurt me.
They get what they deserve.
There must be a good explanation. They are not capable of hurting a guest. None of us are. It would go against our program.
Because child innocence tarnished by neglect and suffering is a very dangerous thing. And speaking of child innocence and neglect, let's move on to the Mimic. Now, remember how I said if we excluded Burn Trap we have 3 options for who Gregory could have been talking to? Well, I lied. There was actually a 4th option. And that 4th option is the Mimic after it came to inhabit the Post-it note garbage room prior to being lured and sealed behind concrete, again, by Gregory and Vanessa. And I say the Mimic was the one living in that room for reasons that I will explain later after I tell you the Mimic's tragic backstory to him. But that's all gonna have to wait until the second video, as this is getting extremely long as is, and unfortunately I'm gonna have to leave you on a cliffhanger for now. Hopefully, though, it won't be that long of a wait for me to finish recording and editing the second part to all this. Anyway, thanks to all of you who have listened this far, and
see you soon.